Our next guest, Evan Barker, has written a book. We referenced an op-ed the other day that she wrote, which is sort of in part a snapshot of her book, Nothing Left, Confessions of a Democratic Operative. And it speaks to her inability to countenance what the party to which she affiliated has become in the era of identitarian-driven socialism, I guess, is the way to say it. And she's from the Midwest, Kansas City area. And she went viral back in 2024 with a TikTok video as to why she could not support Kamala Harris. And that was the beginning of a move away from her previous life as being an operative for candidates in that party. I wonder if it's candidates like Francesca Hong. She is a Wisconsin state legislator. We were talking with Scott Walker about her yesterday a bit. Likely to be the nominee for governor of the DSA/Dem party. And she has previously taken DSA planks as her platform. You know, things like abolish police. So she's being asked about them now, and she's trying to provide a more fulsome context to avoid having to defend a straightforward defund police position, which will be difficult in the state of Wisconsin. You know, one of the reasons that Ron Johnson has survived and even thrived there is because of the candidates that he's drawn. And Mandela Barnes tried to play that identitarian game with him last go around, and he got wiped out because, outside of Madison and parts of Milwaukee, cheeseheads tend to be relatively commonsensical on public safety, as most people are, regardless of which party you affiliate with. This is what the good Representative Hong had to say as she was pressed on the issue recently.
Why do you believe that the police must still exist?
Still exist? Because the reality of this moment and in the types of public safety systems that we have, I want us to be sensible and realistic, but we know now that the billions invested in the criminal legal system is not working. We are spending on incarcerating an individual more than tuition for UW-Madison. This is about making sure that local law enforcement is working with community, that we are taking resources from the state and investing in things like public education, victim services, out of school programs for our kids to go and have a great, be able to be themselves. These are things that data and facts have shown that prevent crime. Again, if you want to be tough on crime, you better be tough on causes.
Do you still long-term want to abolish police? The ultimate?
I believe that we have to be serious about public safety, and I'm going to be a governor that is more serious than anyone else in making sure that we are building systems of care, that we are focusing on lowering crime, getting guns off of our street, and making sure that folks who are incarcerated, which 90% of those folks will be going back to community, that we're lowering recidivism rate. And it's appalling to me that for folks who are working within our prisons, they have some of the highest suicide rates of any job and occupation. So this system is not working. If we want to be serious, we better be putting these billions into the things that we know prevent crime.
Mm-hmm. If you're asked the question, is your long-term plan to abolish police, and your answer is that no, of course not, and then you go on to provide additional details as you want to, it's more than about this, it's more than about police and incarceration, it's about other matters too, fine. But when you dodge the opportunity to say, no, of course not, I'm not interested in abolishing police, or I've evolved, whatever you need to do to move off of that untenable position, when you don't do that, that's sort of a tell. Also, I found this out about Miss Hong. She ran a ramen shop with her husband. She wanted to give raises to all the workers so they would have a quote-unquote sustainable wage. At least she's trying to, live her values, impose the same wages on her business that she would impose on other businesses by fiat. She wanted to do that even when the business was financially unable to sustain such wages. So instead, they shut down the business and fired everyone. which is also what happens to other people in the real world, but they're not as enthusiastic about it. Let's talk to Evan Barker, writer, author of the book Nothing Left, Confessions of a Democratic Operative. Evan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
A pleasure to have you. And so is Francesca Hong the kind of candidate that has moved you to rethinking your affiliations?
She is exactly the type of candidate who's made me to completely reevaluate the people that I wanted to work with and actually know some of the people behind her campaign currently. I helped train them to learn how to fundraise, so it's not entirely surprising. But yeah, she definitely comes out of the world that I used to work with. And I think what you said earlier in the segment, you called it identitarian socialism. I think that is the perfect way to put it. I wouldn't even necessarily call them like real socialists in many ways, because what I see them focus on a lot isn't actually economic at all. It is more just about these cultural politics, like defunding the police and abolishing ICE and Green New Deal. And, it's still so hard for me to understand why, after 2024, after Donald Trump won the election, on the economy, really, and immigration, and public safety too, actually, that they are just still not understanding that what people are thinking about in their day-to-day lives, what normal, ordinary Americans are thinking about, are not defunding the police or not abolishing ICE, but just, how to pay the rent, how to pay for groceries, how to pay for gas, things like that. And I don't see how people like Hong or Abdul Al-Sayed running in Michigan nearby are going to be able to build a big enough coalition to win these general elections. I think that these candidates are putting Democrats in real danger to be able to win places like the Rust Belt and to, keep the blue wall, which has proved critical for them in previous elections.
Yeah, Abdul Al-Sayed made some news this week by suggesting, metaphorically, of course, only, that John Fetterman's head should be put on a spike as a warning to others who would stray from leftist orthodoxy, which is, a particularly inopportune characterization for a self-avowed Muslim, anti-Zionist, some like me might say anti-Semite, a particularly unfortunate metaphor to use.
I didn't hear that he said that. That's very disappointing. I worked for Abdul Al-Sayed too. I did not write about him in the book when I was writing about the book. When I was writing the book last year, he wasn't as much in the national conversation at that point in time. I did work with him. He was very kind to me personally, when we worked together. But ultimately, I just think that he has too many views that are out of step. And like Francesca, is unable to completely distance himself from these super unpopular policies that I thought had been sort of laid to rest in the 2024 election. I live in San Francisco now, or not in San Francisco directly, but in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm originally from the heartland. I'm originally from Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And, in San Francisco, we rebuked these policies. We were kind of like ground zero for these experiments of, rolling back public safety laws. And the voters there, even though they're very liberal, right, in general, they elected a moderate mayor who said that he would, make sure that the police had every resource that they needed, that would allow police to actually pursue crime again. There was a law for a while in California where, like, basically if there was some sort of theft or whatever, like, police weren't even allowed to pursue it, which, obviously created a climate and an environment where people were just taking advantage of that. They weren't prosecuting minors. And, you know, I lived in San Francisco during these times and, you know, with a young son, with a toddler, and after working in the criminal justice reform movement too, it really, really woke me up. I mean, I was already disillusioned at this point, but it woke me up even more to the realities on the ground of these types of policies. And when I would talk to my former peers in progressive politics about it, even though I was living there, they would just tell me that it wasn't true, even though I was actually there. They would say, like, oh, that's just a right-wing conspiracy created by Fox News. And I think many of them must actually still hold that belief. And it's kind of crazy to me.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting you bring up San Francisco because it really is an outlier. The last place you might think would be an outlier. So Lurie replaces London Breed. The district attorney Bowden gets recalled on these issues of public safety that you mentioned. So San Francisco moved more towards the middle, if you will, and yet,
they did.
and every other big city is going, you know, just about every other big city is going full Brandon Johnson or Zoran Memdani. What happened in San Francisco that's not happening in L.A., Chicago, New York, other cities? I mean, like, why? Why?
It got really bad there. It really did. I think after COVID, and then with all of these new policies enacted. I mean, I'm sure you guys read about it on the news and stuff.
Oh, sure.
At times it felt like you were in like a war zone or like a third world country, depending on what neighborhood you were in. And I think, you know, the people there, especially the Asian community in San Francisco, really, I have to give them credit for being the ones that are common sense and were willing to fight back on these policies. And I think people just got so sick of it. And yeah, we replaced the DA there. We got rid of Chesa Boudin. We got a new mayor. And I think people just got so fed up. I mean, I remember when I lived there, I had a 1-year-old son at that time, and I would take him to the playground. There'd be homeless people sleeping in the park. We'd go to CVS. Everything would be locked up. There were carjackings nearby. There were nannies that were just walking down the street with little babies in their strollers, and they were getting mugged, you know, by teenagers with guns, you know, because these teens knew that they weren't going to be prosecuted. And so it was kind of like an open free-for-all. And luckily that, you know, I think it was the Asian community and then the working class Latinos and the tech community kind of coming together and voting some of these policies out. Ironically, the white progressives there, I think those neighborhoods actually still voted for people like Chesa Boudin and wanted them to remain in office. So, you know, we wised up, and I think the rest of the country is going to have to go through harder times, maybe, unfortunately, to do the same thing.
Yeah, it got bad enough, and that's clearly not the case in the minds of the electorates in other cities, I suppose. But, you know, I don't know if you look at it this way, but I sort of look at everything as a continuum, and I understand, you know, you sort of cut your teeth in the Obama era politically. And I wonder if you think that we were on, and the left was on this trajectory dating back for some time now, that sort of increased in pace during Obama, and then now in the era of AOC, if you will, it has sort of gone up at a 45-degree angle. Or if this is just something that's episodic, it's not a continuum, it's just episodic, and for some reason, maybe you could explain, the DSA is ascendant now in a way they weren't even a cycle or two ago.
I can definitely explain that for you guys. And I write about this in my book, too, because I was there. I was there at the very beginnings of this DSA movement, actually. I started working in progressive politics in 2018. I was actually there the day that Bernie Sanders and AOC first ever even met each other. People don't realize this. The first time they ever met was in Kansas. 1 month after AOC's upset with Joe Crowley. And so I think, if I think back to Obama's election, that's when I first really got activated in Democratic politics. And that's because I was born with a pre-existing health condition, and, he promised me health care. And if I think to that campaign in 2008, he really ran a kind of colorblind, more populist-focused campaign, I think, in 2008. And then in the next election, and then especially, I think it got ramped up when Hillary Clinton ran against Bernie Sanders. She really turned to identity politics to try to undo him as her opponent. And then when AOC came along and the squad came along, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, all of the people that came with AOC, I think that they really, really leaned into this. And I almost view it as a co-opting. A lot of people say that AOC was co-opted by the Democratic Party. But I think the reality is that the Democratic Party has actually been co-opted by AOC. And I think that as the base has grown more radicalized in response to Donald Trump, they've leaned more into the policies and the points of view of the far left. And I think the reason that you're seeing them supercharged right now is because, when I started with them a decade ago, they were still very new. Most of the people that were involved in AOC's rise and the squad's rise, they were very young. They didn't have much experience besides Bernie Sanders' first campaign. They didn't know how to use money in politics. They didn't even believe in money in politics. They didn't know how to fundraise. And so now they've had a decade to learn from their mistakes. They know how to professionally fundraise. They know how to do independent expenditures. DSA candidates that just won and this wave in New York and in Colorado, they had real money behind them. Daria-Liza Chevalier, she had a $500,000 super PAC that was started by this group called American Priorities, which was founded by a woman who worked at Justice Democrats, who I knew from my days in progressive fundraising. So they have a real infrastructure, and part of it is that the establishment iced them after AOC's won. And I write about this all in my book, Nothing Left. And so they really, because they were blacklisted and they were iced out, they had to create their own parallel power structure that ran parallel to the DNC, and they recruited their own donors. Some of them are billionaire donors. They've got real money behind them. And I think that is the difference between now and 10 years ago, and why they're coming back so much stronger and even more further to the left, actually.
But in addition to resources, you still have to have appeal. And so what is it that is animating so many to move in the DSA direction and vote for DSA candidates? I mean, part of it seems to me like one of the litmus tests is support for Islamism. And I wonder if that's a separator between the DSA candidates and the Chuck Schumers of the world, who's certainly not a centrist, but isn't an Islamist either.
So the litmus test change; those are kind of episodic, right? They change cycle to cycle. I think in 2018 it was more, it was more abolish ICE, which it kind of still is, and Medicare for all and Green New Deal, right? And now it's like abolish ICE and disavowing Israel. And so I think what the progressives do is they pick these signifiers that differentiate them from the mainstream of the party. And then they use those to signify to the public, okay, this is how we're different from other Democrats, and so this is why you should vote for us. And they're really, really skilled at taking these signifiers and then pushing them into the national conversation. And to answer your question about why why these voters are so willing to vote for these people and why the base seems to have gotten more radical, I think the answer is because the base the average Democratic voter, even if they're not as far to the left as Abdul El-Sayed or Francesca Hong, they are rightfully frustrated. I have to be fair here. They are rightfully frustrated at the Democratic establishment, at people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris for losing now so many times to Donald Trump. And the reason that the establishment is lost is because they're empty. While the progressives actually do believe in things, I think it's the wrong things, the establishment doesn't really believe in anything. And I think they've lost so much now that the average Democratic voter is so fed up with them that they're looking for alternatives. And unfortunately, the only built-in alternative is the Zohran Mamdani wing of the party. And so that's why you're seeing this sharp leftward turn.
Do you think that the DSA is sort of at its peak now, and unless there is real success in the midterms, it will subside? Or we're looking at a DSA that is going to be the dominant element in the party, your former party, or your current party, I don't know, but in the Democrat Party with an eye towards 2028, and it's not going to be some candidate from central casting that the establishment wants like Gavin Newsom. It's much more likely to be somebody like AOC as the presidential nominee.
I think that the DSA is definitely ascendant, and I write about this in my book, Nothing Left too. Progressives know that, and they talk about this openly behind the scenes, but they know that the way to make their mark on presidential elections is by doing really well during midterms. They call it tone setting. So if they're able to rack up enough wins in the midterms and get enough attention and enough spotlight, which is exactly what they're doing right now, and that's what they did with AOC and Rashida and Ilhan in 2018 too, but they're doing it even in a bigger way, actually, this cycle, that they can then use that energy and galvanize the base of the party against those presidential candidates. This is the part of the reason that you saw really more like mainstream Democrats like Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris in 2020 running on all of their policies in the presidential primary. And so I think their plan is to win as many people, or, to win as many seats as they can right now. And then, in partnership with Zohran and AOC and Bernie and all of the new squad members, to basically take their policies and then force each candidate, doesn't matter who they are, to the left in the presidential primary in 2028, guaranteeing that whoever wins will be forced to focus on their policies, which is kind of what happened with Joe Biden. That's why, he ran as a moderate, but once he got in, he went far to the left because he had to appease the base.
Do you think the Republican Party is responding effectively to this ascendant DSA, or is it playing largely into the DSA's hands and better watch out because the DSA can win and their candidates can win general elections?
I do worry that the Republican Party isn't focused enough on domestic matters and the economy and the affordability crisis, because that is very, very real. And I worry that maybe, some swing voters, in upcoming elections feel like, their economic position hasn't improved enough. And so they end up going to these more radical alternatives. So I am thinking about that a lot. I also think that the mainstream Democratic Party has not responded to these candidates ferociously enough either. I think only 13 moderate Democrats have come out recently to say that they're willing to fight the DSA. And I think part of it is because they're terrified of getting primaried and they know the direction that their base is going in. And on top of that, a lot of people don't realize this, but behind the scenes, the staffers that often even work for these more establishment centrist Democrats, they themselves are radicalized because they're younger and they end up sympathizing more with people like Zohran. And so they're telling the politicians behind the scenes, hey, don't criticize Zohran. Don't come out against the DSA. We don't want to alienate young people. We don't want to alienate these voters. And so it's kind of like the party is really captured from all sides.
Yes. Appeasement is a poor strategy. Evan Barker, writer and author of the just-released book, Nothing Left, Confessions of a Democratic Operative. Again, Nothing Left is the book. Evan Barker, the author. Evan, thanks so much for joining us. Really interesting. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. Have a great morning.
You too. And she joined us in the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. It's news, opinion, and insight at the speed of your life. Streaming at 560theanswer.com on the AM 560 mobile app, or tell your smart speaker to play The Answer Chicago.
Sunshine and 66 degrees.